Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of We're Not Okay, a community of healing. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Antia Allen, and I'm joined by my co host.
Hey everybody, Justin Stewart.
And we once again have an amazing conversation for you with another great guest, someone that we know a little bit better than some of our other guests, just from a little book that you might know of called We're Not Okay. We are joined by Dr. Anica. Welcome, Dr. Anica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. We truly appreciate it. We're glad that we were able to stay connected with you. Many thanks on the chapter that you contributed to this book. That work really, truly, I feel like frames the entire book because your chapter focused on mental health, which is your specialty, and we're going to get into that today. But honestly, I'm ready to jump right in. If you're ready to jump right in,
Yeah,
I
let's do
have. Okay, all right.
it.
So, for many of our listeners, they know that we're always referencing LinkedIn. I feel like LinkedIn should start giving us some money for all the LinkedIn mentions we make. But I'm going to mention it again. So there was a LinkedIn post that you made, and you were referring to the book by Dr. Heather McGee. And your video response focused on false dichotomies. And that stuck out to me, honestly, because of what we're seeing come out, it feels like every 5 seconds, with these anti-DEI executive orders. And one of the things that you pointed out in this false dichotomies post was the idea of that just because some people have more, it doesn't mean that others will have less, right? And
Yes.
a word that really jumped out is a word that I think of every time I hear or read about a new anti-DEI executive order, which is fear.
Hmm.
And this idea that these people are taking our jobs, these
Mhm.
people are taking our seats when it comes to classrooms and admissions. And so I wanted to know, did you feel like there were any connections between these anti-DI executive orders or legislation that even rolled out way before this, and that idea of like false dichotomies?
100%. I mean, I think the whole idea of America's for Americans is rooted in this belief of scarcity, right? That others coming in taking will mean we have less, and therefore let's preserve what we have and try to maximize our access to it. And I think Heather does such a fantastic job in that book because she goes into great detail about the cost that comes from that scarcity model and mindset, right? She spends a lot of time talking about what happened around the swimming pools, the community swimming pools, for example. There's sort of like a running joke, I think, in many Black communities about Black people not knowing how to swim, right? And it's funny, but it also is rooted in a lot of pain because when you think about it, it's access to swimming pools that was denied and cut off that prevented many people from being able to learn that as a pastime. And so then it became, we don't do that, right? But in the book, she goes over the sense that because people did not want to share this community resource, what they did instead was drain the pools and fill them in. So no one got to swim, right? And those who did it in more private settings like country clubs and smaller, insular communities where access could be monitored and limited. And so when you think of it as you getting some means I have less, then you want to hoard. You want to keep it all to yourself. And you will then institute policies, you will institute executive orders, you will pass laws that allow for you to retain as much as possible and limit someone else's access to what you perceive as your own. I think another word in there is entitlement, right? It's not a fun word, but it's a true one. And if you feel that you deserve this more than someone else, then the audacity of them to ask for a part in it feels very upsetting to you, just from a moral perspective, right? And so we have fear of not having enough, and then we have this sense of indignation that something that's rightly mine is being asked to be shared with people who are not deserving, and therefore I have every right to stop them.
And one point you made in the post was the idea that we could actually end up with zero, right? And that zero includes white people.
Yes.
And then I thought about all of the layoffs we've seen, right? Recently, all of the people who are losing their jobs in many different areas, but mainly in the federal government, and how so many of these people have come out and said how they supported this particular candidate. um, and then now they're like, oh my gosh, now I'm impacted, right? And so it
Yeah.
really goes back to this idea of you thought that this was going to end up being that you somehow were going to get more of something, but now you're left with that zero.
Absolutely. And when you assumed, right, that only the undeserving among us will be excluded, but I'm deserving, so I will not be excluded, only to find that when someone else gets to decide who is and isn't deserving, you may not be in their numbers and you might actually be on the receiving end of that. And that doesn't feel good suddenly, right? So again, when we operate from a scarcity mindset and we operate from this entitlement mindset, it makes it very hard to think about impact beyond ourselves. And when we are impacted, then we feel wronged because I mean, the rule wasn't for me. I was the exception to the rule. And now you're telling me that I have to abide by said rule? That doesn't feel fair. Now I'm mad.
And thank you so much for that. One thing I didn't do that I want to make sure I do is name this book. So Dr. Heather McGhee's book is The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together.
Mhm.
So definitely want to shout out Dr. McGhee for that. And so what we jumped right into is something that is, I feel like it seems to be very close to your heart, which is these conversations about race, right? And that brings me to your company, your organization, Race Positive. I do want to point out your vision statement, which I absolutely love for Race Positive LLC, which is to dismantle all expressions of racism, prejudice, and bias in every unique sphere of influence. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with Race Positive LLC, can you give us a little bit more background on it and the services that you all offer?
Absolutely. So the company, I started it because as a clinical psychologist, I fundamentally believe in the power of talking, right? The heart of what I do is about coming alongside people, helping them to gain insight, to make change in their lives by talking about those things. And when I observed people talk about issues like race and racism, it felt like couples therapy gone wrong, right? Where people were talking past each other, they were not listening well, they were misinterpreting things that were being said, they were holding grudges. It just was a mess. And watching it play out on social media just made it even worse. And I thought, maybe I could help. Maybe I can help a bit. And so I wanted to bring not only my clinical skills and research background and looking at things like race and the impact of it on our lives, but also things I believed in, like the fact that race is an asset and not a liability, right? That we don't have to excuse it or try to ignore it. We can just recognize it for what it is and then continue on. It's the inequity of value that we place on the different skin tones, not the skin tone itself. That's the problem, right? So being able to bring that value system into the conversation, pulling from positive psychology, which talks about let's focus on what's right with us, not just what's wrong with us, because health is not just the absence of illness, it's also the presence of wellness. And so, how do we operate from a strengths based perspective? Because I noticed that a lot of times when people enter into conversations around race, it focuses, particularly for white people, it focuses on what I don't know, what I can't do, what I'm afraid of doing. And when we operate from that deficit perspective, it doesn't invite curiosity, it doesn't invite leaning in, it doesn't make you feel engaged. You're just interested in self-protection, frankly. And none of that is going to lend itself to any deep change or progress or vulnerability that's necessary for this work to happen. So if we operate from a strengths perspective, then you know how to ask questions, you know how to learn about something that you've never lived before. You've been to a museum, right? So let's use those skills and see how we can use it here in this conversation. And so bringing in those principles and those strategies from positive psychology. And then at the heart part of it, I don't think we have to be hateful to talk about hard things. And so the positive is this, sort of triple meaning where, race is an asset, so it's a positive thing. We can use positive psychology tools to help us, and the conversation, the exchange, even though hard, even though challenging, does not have to be one rooted in me devaluing your humanity and you devaluing mine. I don't think that's needed for these conversations, which often happen, sadly, right, when they happen. So it was all meant to bring all these parts of me together and what I was seeing in the larger world and say, how can I use my expertise and my knowledge to support leaders, to support educators in being able to initiate and navigate conversations around race? Because that's where I felt that people were struggling the most. It's how do I talk about this? How do I stay engaged in this conversation when everything in me wants to stop engaging in this conversation with this person? And so, how do we give them practical tools for doing that? So, the services that we offer span workshops and virtual in-person workshops. It could be one-on-one coaching or support with leadership. It could be smaller works with just an executive team, or going into classrooms and talking to students in that classroom around working and addressing issues of race. It could be working with teachers and how they may apply that to their pedagogy, because regardless of what you're teaching, you can include factors of how race and racism has shaped our world, right? Even if you're talking about mathematics, you can pull that in there. So how can we be intentional about pulling that into what we're talking about? And I do also have a private practice, so I see clients and we talk, of course, about their interests and their needs. And part of that work is incorporating the fact that we are racial beings. We have identities that will shape our lived experiences. And how does that show up for you? And let's talk about what you want to do about that. So it's very much integrated into the therapeutic side as well.
Just the idea, the concept, the execution of race positive and everything that you're providing, Dr. Anica, because even as you have the conversation, like you think certain topics, certain subjects should be easier. Like we should be at a point where instead of pushing each other away because of our differences, we just find opportunities to embrace experiences and just find different opportunities to embrace each other. But it's almost as though the the hard way is kind of the preferred way for some of us when it comes to those conversations. And it's just this concept of, I don't understand and I just do not want to understand. It could be a certain level of entitlement, as we talked about earlier. We think about when Americans go to different countries and there's a certain level of entitlement when it comes to language. So just having an opportunity, having an organization like Race Positive kind of helps, cut through that noise. So we appreciate that you exist. We appreciate that your organization exists, because as of right now, if it wasn't the case before, it's now so much more of a hot button topic when it comes to conversations about race. The next thing that we want to pivot to talks about your Real Talk series. So again, through LinkedIn, if you all do not, make sure you do follow Dr. Anica on LinkedIn. She drops all the gems that you need and all the gems that we have for today. So when you talk about your organization, the Real Talk series, as you mentioned, it's using positive psychology to enhance racial dialogue. And in the post that I'm referencing, you stated that racial dialogue still matters. Keep talking. I think that concept of keep talking is paramount for right now, because to put it plainly, it feels like the ground that we walk on is covered with landmines. We went from a period where we were exploring race and having those types of in-depth discussions to now words like diversity are essentially becoming outlawed. It's become situations where diversity officers are losing their jobs. And as Antia mentioned throughout the news, we just see where we're continuously taking steps back. So taking more of a look into the Real Talk series, Dr. Anica, we wanted to get your opinion on, when we're looking at the personal aspect, but also looking at the work place, how important is it for us to know how to navigate these race-based conversations, especially in this time where everything is very much a hot button, everything is don't say this, don't say that, and it's kind of where when I mentioned earlier about embracing experiences, it's not something it's kind of frowned upon now, and people are feeling as though if I mention these things, to put it plainly, my livelihood is at risk, my job is at risk. What would be your advice for those that are still trying to navigate or have those types of conversations?
Yeah, it's hard because that's not hyperbolic at all to say that your livelihood and your job could be at risk for talking about this in certain spaces. It's absolutely the reality of it. And we want to be sensitive to that fact. And I think take, individual situational factors into consideration for how people apply and live out what it is that, I would share through this series. But at the heart of it, I think it comes down to two things. And that there are a number of things throughout this series that I'm going to roll out and sort of share in terms of key points, with the goal of saying, is it still okay to talk about race today? And if so, how do we do it? But the two things I want to highlight from the series, is one, this idea of what you just said, the belief that talking still matters. We are now in a time where the act of talking about racism is more problematic than racism itself. And when you do that, you kind of get away from the whole point of the discord. And so I think it's sort of an internal decision that no, I still see value here in having these conversations. I still am willing to see the nuance, to express and invite curiosity, to have a genuine exchange of belief and ideas with another person about my lived experiences, about their lived experiences. Now, does that have to happen with everyone, everywhere, all the time? Certainly not. And again, you want to be judicious, you want to be discerning about when and where and how, but do it, I would say, right, in some way, in some capacity. And so that's one of the first things that I think is important. The second thing I want to highlight is that a lot of times, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this too, but I feel like a lot of the conversation around inequity, you know, the system that were the racialized system that we're in and the problems within it, quickly can devolve into this, for lack of a better term, oppression Olympics, right? Where it becomes who suffered more and therefore is more deserving of blank resources. And yeah, as a kid, I would joke around that I could never win any of those giveaways on like the Today Show or Live with Regis and Kelly because I just want to win. I don't have like a story of rescuing a three-legged dog from the top of an Empire State Building by walking by foot all the way up, all the stories on one leg. Like I don't have a story like that. So it's hard to make a case for why I am more deserving than someone who does have a story like that, right? So when you kind of get into that, there's no winning for anybody. It's just about who suffered the most. And then it's a subjective marker for who suffered most. Instead, it's about opportunity and access to resources. That's really what it's at the heart of. The heart of a racialized system is the limitation of access to resources and opportunity for people who are deemed unworthy of access to it. And a lot of times, the ask isn't just, hey, let's get a bunch of people into the room because, well, they all look different and therefore they should be in the room. It's no, we want people who are appropriate for this room, but all who desire to be in this room should have the opportunity to petition for entry and should not be placed with unnecessary hurdles and barriers for that access to opportunity and entry. And when we shift the conversation to emphasizing access and opportunity, then we can get to the conversation that many opponents of DEI would say, which is merit, right? But it's hard to that's hard to. It's easy to be the best in the room when you're the only person in the room, right? When you're the only one standing there, it's very easy for you to be the best one. But if you're truly interested in being the best one, then everyone who is interested in participating will have access to enter said race. And the way that a meritocracy works is that as the race unfolds, the best will show up. They will rise to the top, right? So when we're talking about this idea of access and opportunity, I think it's recognizing when the conversation is being shifted to something that is just about quotas and numbers and putting unqualified people into spaces that they don't belong, and shifting it back to no, we're talking not about unqualified versus qualified. We're talking about qualified people being in the room, and then saying your lived experiences, your social identities have given you a unique set of lens. How does that lens add to what we already have? And if it can add a unique feature that we don't yet have, then that's valuable to us. It's not about just saying, you know, yeah, you look black, but you want to join my exec team? Come on, come on over. That doesn't work. It's silly to even do that. But I do think that's where the conversation goes, and then it starts becoming about everything but the real issue at hand. So for me, when we're talking about this series, it's about helping people to see that talking still matters, and then let's get back to the real point of why we're all advocating for this in the first place, which is let's remove unnecessary barriers to entry and hurdles that unnecessarily stop people's opportunity to run the race that they could run.
You pulled so many threads, created so many more conversations. We'll try and stay on track, but it's just all the items that you pull in are very true to how we exist in the society, whether it's nationally or globally. I do agree with you with this. I think you mentioned earlier, but in my interpretation, this idea of victimization of who can be more oppressed. I jokingly laugh to myself, like I may think of times when I've talked to my mother or talked to like an older person and just say, "Oh, this is what I'm going, what's going on with me," and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, you know me. This is what happened to me." I trip. It's like I understand that this is what happened to you, but I'm trying to share what I'm going through right now, and I think it's that trauma dumping that we find ourselves doing a lot of the times where we're trying to relate, but then through that level of relatability, we're kind of minimizing the experience of someone else. So it's like I understand what's happened to you, but I just want to selfishly, I just want to talk about, what I just experienced. And I think it's maybe we really don't know at this stage how to show empathy as much as we may think. And it's a lot easier to be like, oh, okay, well, let me make you feel bad about me too, and we'll just feel bad about each other. But we don't, as you mentioned, get to the point where we find a solution. When we steep ourselves or exist in this state of problems, we don't know how to find ourselves out of that hole. We don't know how to actually pursue some state of success. And I think that's kind of where we thrive in. It's almost in that situation where you're at certain jobs, it's like all these problems, but it's like, oh, job security. As long as the system continues to be broken, then you'll always have a job. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, we'll never reach that utopia. So it's that it's that counterproductive nature that we have, but it continues to allow things to thrive even at the behest or for the when it's not benefiting us.
Absolutely. And it feels good to bond with people, right? Over shared grievances. That's why gossip is so sweet for some people, right? Because you're like, yeah, me too. Let me tell you, right? It feels good, even if it doesn't yield anything that's truly beneficial in the end. And I think I would just add to what you said there in that not only does it keep you stagnated, but then it ties into this scarcity mindset we were talking about with Antia earlier, which is we're now fighting over the little bit that's there as opposed to thinking there's an ocean available, not a lake. Why are we fighting over an ocean of items? When the sorry, a lake of items when there's an ocean available and we can all have to our heart's content as much as we want. And so when it becomes this lake mindset, this scarcity mindset, well, then your suffering has to be weighted against my suffering. And if you think you suffered more, then you have every right to be entitled to things that I am asking for, and therefore I'm inappropriate or I'm wrong or you're upset because I've taken something that you felt was due for you.
Sure enough. But we want to make sure everyone doesn't feel as doom and gloom. Well, I wanted to ask as we pivot a little bit, through your organization, through your work, through your consulting work, when it comes to these types of conversations, where areas where you think that we've been doing right, or things where it's like, oh, you all are on the right path. And then on the opposite end of the coin, where are opportunities for us to be better when we're having conversations through your consulting?
Yeah, so I think where we get it right is that people show up. If I'm invited into an organization to have a workshop or to present on something, people come. They really do. And I'm very intentional about making the experience inviting for everyone there. Not comfortable because it's never going to be comfortable. Not safe because, well, I can't make you safe, but I can create an environment where you're more willing to engage and to be vulnerable, right, with me. And so I think people showing up and being willing to lean in when it could be so easy for them to sit back and roll their eyes or not engage, is a win. I count that as a win. I think where we can do more is when another core belief that I have is the person with the most power in the room has the most responsibility to bring up the hard thing. And I think leadership means that you go first. And so when we're talking about things around race, I think it's important that the leader is saying, hey, we're not all the same here. Uh, let's just talk about how that may affect who is and isn't willing to say or do things in this space, not in a critical way, not in a way that we're looking to incite conflict, but in a way that says we're not blind to factors. Let's name them. And if nothing is at present that needs addressing, we let it go. But if it does, now we have a pathway or an on-ramp to get to that. And so I think sometimes you may have leaders who will shy away from even bringing it up until something happens. And then they're in this quagmire of like, how do I get everybody to behave? Everyone, please stop. And let's just get back to status quo. But status quo is really silence. It's not actually addressing things. And so I think where we can grow is just anyone in a leadership position. And you could be, on the team of your school club, like student government, or I was president of Key Club when I was in high school. You could be like a club like that, or you could very well be of a 500, company, and and something massive like that. We all have sphere of influence, and so it's being able to say, in this sphere that I have influence, how can I model? How can I use my um the leverage and the power that I have, not to virtue signal, not to make people feel terrible for existing in the skin or the life that they have. None of that is fruitful, but it's to be able to say, hey, I noticed when you said that just now, you were looking over there, and calling them in, not in a public shaming way, but just like, I don't know if that was your intention, but I just noticed that that kind of created a weird dynamic. I just want to make you mindful of it. Maybe it's something you can do about it, maybe not, but I don't know if you noticed, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Something subtle like that could be great. Or recognizing that certain people never speak, and you're saying, I just want to make sure that we also hear from Susan. Susan, tell us your thoughts. Because I firmly believe that this issue of race and racism, it affects all of us. None of us get a free pass. We're all touched by it, maybe in different ways and in different degrees, but we're all touched by it. And so we all have a responsibility to help fix it and to get rid of it. And so using your sphere of influence to invite people in, I think is one of the ways we can do that better.
Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Here at We're Not Okay, a community of healing, we've built a space where individuals can come together to process grief, manage stress, and share truths that are often carried in silence. Now, healing isn't only about conversation. It's also about getting the right support when you need it most.
That's where BetterHelp comes in. They connect you with licensed therapists online, anytime, anywhere. So you can get guided help from an expert in a supportive space you can trust. Therapy isn't just for the hard moments. It's also a tool for personal growth and development. And one of the best features of BetterHelp is that if you don't feel like that first therapist is the right fit, you can easily switch to a therapist that you truly connect with.
With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5-star rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform that you can rely on. It's something that you can trust. So visit betterhelp.com/the not okay pod. Again, but it's going to be down here too. betterhelp.com/the not okay pod. And with that, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy. Because just like this community, you don't have to work through life's challenges alone. And I love that you transitioned over to the role of leadership, leadership lead. You set the precedent. We think of times in which Auntie and I have gone to workshops and, you may be looking for the president. Like you said, they're not showing up. And we're in situations similar where, well, if that person doesn't care, then why should I care? Or, the great thing of, oh, hey, I gotta run. I just wanted to make sure I said thank you. Trust me, everyone, we appreciate when you're there, but your presence for 5 minutes is a lot different than your presence for the full hour and a half, the full 45 minutes. And those in the room see that. And as you mentioned, they may model the behavior or they may see it and then take it as resentment of, oh, this person doesn't actually care. They're kind of just doing there for the flicks. They're doing it, if we're talking about IG language, or they're just doing it for the likes to make it seem like they're about it. And then when things occur, you kind of look at them with a side eye.
Right.
It's like, oh, well, no, It's like, no, I know, but I don't know if you know.
Right.
So again, the whole idea of being leadership, you set the precedent. If you can't be there, if this isn't something that matters to you, then those that fall under you, it's not going to matter to them as well. So thank you for again reiterating the fact of how vital it is for leadership and how we need to also make sure that leadership is held accountable. When you have a workshop, it's not just, okay, everyone go to their corners. What do we do next? How do we continue to push this forward? We don't just exist in this one session, then we go back to the status quo. When you're a leader, you're held accountable for continuing to foster and cultivate these open and safe discussions. So thank you for detailing it or waxing it poetically the way that you just did.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you.
All right. And Tia, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna pass it right back to you. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So I'm sure when people are able to see the video clip, they'll see that next to your name, Dr. Anica, it says Resilience Institute Provost. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the Resilience Institute and a blog article, I believe, that you wrote for them, which is using the R word in therapy, and the R word being race.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really interesting because going back to having like these conversations about race, even me who studied psychology, thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist. Um, I never even really thought about using the R word as far as race within, therapy. Even though now when I think back, I don't know if anybody in my class when I was studying was Black except for me. So that's interesting. Because and in those graduate courses, you're like practicing with other people. And I'm like, at no time was I ever with anyone else that was Black. I did have some Asian classmates, but again, like I would have never thought to even bring it up. But I would love to hear like your take on that, the idea of using race or bringing up race in therapy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think of it as, so I spent a lot of my career in academia, and I worked a lot in college mental health, and I worked in a lot of schools that were predominantly white. So a lot of my clients were white. And one of the things that I would do is I would say, just in getting to know them, I would say, how do you identify racially or ethnically? And the amount of, what do you mean? That I would get compared to when I would ask a student of color, they were like, "Oh, I'm Black, I'm Latina, I'm Asian." Like they'll have an answer ready. But a lot of the white students would be like, "I'm just white. Like I don't know. My mom's like Italian, I guess." Like they'll have that sort of thing. And I felt that it was, again, going back to what I shared earlier, the person with the most power in the room has the most responsibility in the room. And for me, those were subtle moments of being able to say, white is a color too. White is a racial identity too, and it shapes your experiences too. And it's not just something for people who look like me to sort out, right? And so I'm going to ask you to sit with that, because at the very least, it's going to make you aware that we're not identical. And the fact that we're not identical is going to influence how we show up in this space, right? It does mean that good work can be done. I firmly believe that amazing work can be done in cross-racial dyads. I've done it, right? I've felt like we've done amazing things together. But it's not something to ignore or to skirt around, because again, it's not a shameful thing. Like, there's no reason for you to apologize for your skin color any more than I need to apologize for my skin color. So the same way I would ask you about your dating history and your family history, because it's shaped who you are and how you are dealing with your current situation, your racial identity is also going to play a role in that, right? So let's talk about it. So that's sort of the early ways in which I would bring it into the work that I would do. And I encourage people in the field to do similar things, to bring it up. And it does not have to be heavy-handed. And I think it's that fear that it has to be, all right, let's sit and talk now. That people are like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to bring down the room. I'm going to change the mood here. I'm going to make it about me. And I don't want it to be about me. It has to be about the client. It's none of that. It's just simply saying, so we're not identical. Any concerns or anything that you could see that might make this a little challenging for us? And they might say, no, I think it's fine. And then I say, okay, great. If at any point though, it does feel that way, I invite you to say that to me and let's talk about it, right? And then we move on. And maybe it never comes up, or they can say, so my roommate's black and she really annoys me, and I feel bad saying that because it makes me racist, but I don't think it is. And you said I could talk to you about this. I'm going to bring it up to you, as opposed to in their minds saying, I can't tell this black therapist that I don't like my black roommate because she's going to assume that I'm racist and I can't talk about this. And now a big part of your stressor is not coming into the room. And I'm doing all this work to sort of support you manage your stress, but we're not talking about a key piece of your stress, right? So it's not helpful to act as if these things are beside the point. I'll give an example of a time when talking about it was so powerful. I had a client who did identify as black, and this client had was in a graduate program, and they were just feeling really a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of imposter phenomenon feelings, and they didn't quite understand where that was coming from. And as we sat, we were talking about being the black kid growing up and the assumption that they were not smart, that they were not supposed to be there, and the pressure that they felt to prove their worthiness of being in that space. And even though that was a long time ago, how that was still playing out in their current state and in their current situation. And as we talked about that, part of you feels like you don't belong, or that you have to prove your smartness. So every time you answer a question, there's an waving of anxiety because you're afraid that you might say something that's going to reveal that you truly do not belong there, that you're not actually smart after all, and confirm all of these stereotypes that you're afraid of confirming, which the term for that is a stereotype threat, right? The fear of confirming these negative stereotypes about a group with which you identify. And so when you're caught up in that self-protective, anxious state, you're not present, you're not focused, you're not engaged in the way that you can be. And so, yeah, your performance is going to go down. Yeah, you're not going to show up as your best self. And you're almost going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So how do we recognize that these old narratives are playing into your experience today? And how do we challenge that and reshape how you're engaging and seeing yourself as belonging? The fact that they let you in is proof that you belong, because they're not just handing out, acceptance rates in grad school. Like, you have to do stuff to be there, right? So the fact that you're there is already proven. There's nothing left to prove. Now we just exist in this space. And for that person, that really was like a big moment for them to come to a place of peace. And so things like that, again, that they didn't bring it up. I was one that said, tell me what it was like growing up in school, and what was said about you or was assumed about you because of the way that you look. And so things like that are ways that we can see the value in talking about race and therapy, and how it really can take the work to a deeper level and maybe have even greater room for creating change.
Again, with the layers of the onion that we continue to peel back, it's just like I said, it's a lot more multifaceted. It's a lot more complex than we present it to be. As you were talking specifically about your session with one of your clients,
Mm-hmm.
your white clients, it kind of makes me think of a recent time, and it kind of puts me in a crossroads because the woman was talking and she was saying how you could feel like the fear that she had in having conversations about race because she kind of felt like she was going to be attacked, or oh, how do I say it the right way? And it's just all of that stifled her from having that conversation. I say the crossroads because of the fact that on one end it's like if you have to ask the question, you should have the EQ, emotional intelligence, to offer it in a way where you're being aware of the situation and presenting in a way where it's not going to offend. But then in the same breath, I'm like, well, depending on who she may be talking to, depending on the context of the conversation or the temperament of the conversation. She may be talking to somebody Black, somebody Asian, somebody, a woman, or somebody that's in a marginalized community where she may not feel as comfortable or feel as though her opinion would be embraced. So I guess as you were talking, that's kind of where I was at the crossroads of like, oh, should we be creating an atmosphere where she feels more comfortable? Or to what you talked about with imposter syndrome, and how we always feel as though we shouldn't have to explain to you and we exist in this level of uncomfortability. So if you have to be uncomfortable, as long as you're able to get your question out, just get your question out. So that as you were talking, I was just like, I see on her end, but in the other breath, I'm like, you got to be uncomfortable sometimes, and kind of pushing through that is where you need to be. You need to get through that uncomfortability to actually have that reality where that others deal with on a day to day, and then you actually are able to have candid, open conversation. But you kind of have to breach through that. Yeah, you have to breach through that area, and sometimes you can't have your hand held to do it. You just have to do it.
Absolutely. I definitely think it's a both and, right? I think that as a community, if we're interested in having everyone play a role in, again, dismantling racism, prejudice, and bias, then we should make it accessible for everyone to partake. I'm not trying to be provocative or anything, but I'm not a fan of when people go, Google is free. I get it. Yes, Google is free, but if we're in conversation and community, tell me about your lived experience because it may not be what Google says, and that's okay to ask. And so to make it problematic to inquire does not feel helpful for me. But again, making it my full responsibility to educate you and you do nothing to educate yourself is not okay either. So I guess about that middle ground. And so creating the space where people are invited to speak, I don't think we can ever make it safe enough for everyone because your level of safety is not my level of safety, and who's managing that, that's a lot of work, right? And so how about you manage yourself, I'll manage myself, and then we'll be okay. So let's make sure we have sort of like community rules where we are engaging in a way that everyone is able to partake should they take the risk of partaking, and internally I decide this is a vulnerable moment, but I'm going to choose to do so with these people in this time, in this environment, right? So I think it's a both and in that conversation example that you gave with that woman, I would say to her, one, reflect on the question that you have and determine if this is the person, place, or time to ask that question. Because maybe it's not. And maybe that's why you're feeling as uncomfortable as you were because it's such a personal question. It's not really right for here. And you're asking people who you're not close to like that to give that answer, right? Or maybe it is an appropriate time and place, but you haven't said anything the whole time and you feel imposter syndrome and you don't want to say the wrong thing. So we get back to that deficit mindset. And so we use some positive psychology skills and say like what's your strength? How can we operate on a strength to help you lean in and engage? I do this with everyone, but particularly in therapy, I say to my clients all the time, throw this back if it doesn't land. And that is an invitation to disagree with me because I could have gotten it wrong. Maybe my understanding of what you said or what I think might be happening isn't how you see it. So correct me. So I think people's defenses tend to go down when you're willing to say, I might be wrong here. And they're more willing to engage with you. So if you are that person, as you described, you're not quite sure how to say it, then say, I'm not quite sure how to say this, and it's going to sound a little funny. So please correct me if there's a better way to say this. But here's what I was curious about. Do you have to take your hair out at night? Or is it just growing in your head? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, then we can laugh about it, and we can say, well, most of us grow our hair, but we do have help if we want it, and it's called a nice weave store, right? So it becomes this community matter, that she learned something, we kind of bonded, but it felt respectful because she was willing to admit that she wasn't quite sure how to say it, but she wanted to know for her benefit. Now that was kind of a silly example, but you see my point, right? Just a willingness um to say the truth of, I don't know how to do this, but I want to. And I'm going to try. I'm not just going to put it on you to make it comfortable for me to do it. Can help both sides feel willing to lean in.
Yeah, and I think it's just realizing the power in it's okay to be wrong, the
Yeah.
power in I don't know, and using that as a springboard or as a bridge or an icebreaker to really unpack some real conversations. So thank you for that. Um, as we are coming to a close, Dr. Anika, you use some buzzwords. You use community, 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 community. As part of our community of healing, we want to know when it comes to you, when it comes to everything that you do, everyone that can see you, you see behind it says positive, the air that you provide to those that you engage, the realizations that you unlock, the food that you feed to those that you're engaging. When it comes to yourself, Dr. Anika, the most important question that we have as this podcast is, what are the moments that bring you joy?
Oh, that's good. Well, lots of little things bring me joy. I'm a very easy laugh. You can make me laugh the cornier the joke, the quicker I laugh, because it's just so bad. How could I not laugh at it? Right. So just simple things like that make me happy, make me joyful. Watching street lights come on as I'm walking and the evening is setting makes me happy. It's just so fun. And I have a 10-year-old niece, and since she was little, we would play this game of trying to catch all the street lights coming on, and making sure, pretending we had superpowers and we were making it turn on by pointing at it and guessing which one was going to come on next. Like little things like that, can bring me joy. Cooking in my kitchen and playing music brings me joy. Cleaning my house and playing music brings me joy. um Funnily enough, I'm a huge country music fan, not into rap at all, never have been, except if you count Will Smith, and I don't think most people do, so I won't either. But Kendrick Lamar, I was like singing and dancing in my kitchen to Not Like Us and Squabble Up and Turn the TV Off. Why do I know these words? I don't know, but I do know them and I can sing along. And so that brought me joy for like a couple of weeks because I could not turn it off. So it's not very hard for me to find joy in things. But my faith, I think at the heart of it grounds me, right? So my faith in God, and how my belief in living in a way that is honoring to God and honoring to the people in my midst, I think is at the heart of where my joy comes from.
And for us, this conversation, I'm going to speak for Justin, brought us joy. Um, we always appreciate having these conversations and learning so much from our guests. And again, it just means even more because we get to learn from someone who we kind of already know a little bit, which is, always a plus. Oh, plus positive. Got it. All right. So talk about things that I'll make myself laugh over nothing. So I love that part when you said that. I can't believe this is the end. But it's not really, right? Well, we're gonna continue to stay connected, but it's the end of this episode. We do appreciate you being here. This was a wonderful conversation, as I knew it would be. I know our listeners are going to run to your website for Race Positive LLC to learn more about your company, your services that you offer. I know that everybody, including us, are excited about this new series that you have coming up. And again, just thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun and such a pleasure. And it was great seeing your faces again. I know a lot of our correspondences over the years have just been, email, virtual, LinkedIn, but I'm glad that we got to sit down together and have a chat, even with my tea that has now gone cold.